Seth, Dreams and Projection of Consciousness by Jane Roberts. Introduction by Robert F. Butts. Published in 1987 by Still Point Publishing. Read by Martin John. Part 1. Intrusions from the Interior Universe. A Subjective Journal. 1. Dreams, Creativity, and the Unconscious. Excerpts from The Physical Universe as Idea Construction. My first glimpse into the interior universe. 3 particular dream events highlighted my psychic initiation and led, indirectly, to this book. The first was a completely minor dream that was surprising to me when it happened, but it could easily have been forgotten. The second was an amazing experience resulting from a dream that I could not remember. The third was a dream that gave me a startling glimpse into another kind of reality. The first dream occurred in July 1963, before I knew anything at all about psychic phenomenon. The third occurred in February 1964, shortly after the Seth sessions had begun. Between these 2 dates, I found myself propelled into a dimension of experience that had been completely unknown to me before. The initial dream involved a neighbor, Miss Cunningham, who lived in this apartment house long before we knew it existed. When Rob and I moved here in 1960, she had already spent a quarter of a century in her 3 small rooms, surrounded by books of poetry and drama. As we came up the front steps, we often saw her sitting in the upstairs window, watching the traffic below. But the year we arrived, her life began to shrink. She retired from her position as a high school drama teacher and spent more and more time in her little apartment. In the beginning, Rob and I only saw her face to face in the dark apartment house hallway, usually at the mailbox. She was fiercely independent, tall and slim, with neatly coiffured hair and tailored clothes. Her English was flawless. She had an excellent reputation as a teacher, and now and then she was visited by former students to whom she served tea. During the holidays, her mailbox was stuffed with cards. These small facts were all we knew of her, and we never became close friends. Yet my first precognitive dream involved her, and, in a strange way, my psychic experience became bound up with her life. I seemed to keep track of her in my dreams. As her world became physically smaller, she seemed to reach out into mine. That summer, Rob and I vacationed in Maine. We hadn't communicated with Miss Cunningham at all, but on the night of our return to Elmira, I awakened suddenly with the memory of a disquieting dream which bothered me so much that I awakened Rob. He sat up astonished. Neither of us remembered dreams at all. "I saw Miss Cunningham, of all people," I said. "We were in a hospital. She wore a black suit, and her eyes were terribly red and sore. She was crying, saying over and over, 'Oh dear, I have to go away, and I don't want to go.' There was a glassed-in area to the left in the hospital lobby, where you could buy gifts for the patients. It was all so real." "Maybe you should write down the dream and date it," Rob said. This upset me further. Why? You don't think that it's symbolic or something, or that it might come true? And why should I even dream of Miss Cunningham? We hardly know her." "Well, it won't hurt to write the dream down, will it?" Rob asked. "No," I muttered, but I had the strangest feeling, as if recording the dream would give it some kind of undue importance. "Anyway, I'd rather just forget it," I said. "I wish that I hadn't remembered it at all." But I got sleepily out of bed, wrote the dream down, and dated it. In the morning I was still upset. Our television set hadn't worked the night before. We didn't have a phone then, so I decided to ask Miss Cunningham if I could use hers to call a repairman. Actually, I thought that if I saw her, hale and hearty as always, I'd feel better. Then, I reasoned, I could just dismiss my dream and forget the whole thing. The minute I knocked on the door, Miss Cunningham opened it. Her hands reached out for mine. Supplicantly. Usually she was primly polite and rather distant. The change in her manner instantly alarmed me. Startled, I drew back for just a moment before asking what was wrong. "Oh, I'm so glad to see someone," she said. "I'm so upset. I've just learned that I have cataracts, and I'll need operations on both of my eyes. It's so depressing." Her voice wavered. With a gesture of despair, she waved at the floor-to-ceiling bookcases and at the magazines piled on the coffee table. "I read so much, so much. What would I ever do if I lost my sight?" I didn't know what to say because I was still so startled. Her eyes were very red and sore-looking, as they had been in my dream. I stayed with her for a short time, trying to be as comforting as I could. Finally I returned to my own apartment, distressed both because of her condition and the connection with my dream of the night before. Yet, later in the day, I managed to convince myself that only coincidence was involved. "After all," I said to Rob, "she wasn't wearing black, and we weren't in a hospital. Maybe I just noticed subconsciously that her eyes were failing and then made up the dream." "Maybe. We haven't seen her in nearly a month, though," Rob said. "Well, it has to be something like that," I said. "I admit that the whole thing is evocative, but it irritates me, too. I mean, think of how much more difficult life could be if we could see the future in dreams. I've got enough to handle as it is." As the days passed, the dream was more or less forgotten. Only now and then did it nag at me, with its disquieting connotations. I felt uneasy, that a small bit of significant tear had been ripped in the nature of things. Looking back, I'm sure that I sniffed danger as surely as any animal who senses something strange and new in his environment, or as any adult when threatened by a change in the status quo. So for all general purposes, I put the dream out of my mind and went on my way. I later mentioned this dream in my first book in the field, How to Develop Your ESP Power. Even then, I had no idea that it would be only one of a series of psychic events involving Miss Cunningham, nor did I see the true significance in my own development. Summer passed and autumn had begun before the next experience, one that was to change my life. I awakened one September morning with the feeling I'd had a most unusual dream during the night, one that would affect me deeply. Yet I had no memory of the dream at all. As the day went on, the feeling vanished. That night I sat down to write poetry for an hour as usual, and, suddenly, the small rift that had opened so slightly with the first dream now yawned wide open. I described that experience in the Seth material, the book, but because it rose from the world of dreams and is so connected with unconscious activity, I want to examine it from a different viewpoint here. The Miss Cunningham dream had startled me. This time, I was swept away by the most awe-inspiring event of my life to that date, yet I was not afraid. One moment I sat at my desk with my paper and pen beside me. The next instant, my consciousness rushed out of my body, yet it was itself bodiless, taking up no space at all. It seemed to be merging with the air outside the window, plunging through the treetops, resting, curled within a single leaf. Exaltation and comprehension, new ideas, sensations, novel groupings of images and words rushed through me so quickly there was no time to call out. There was no present, past, or future. I knew this, suddenly, irrevocably. Then, gradually, I became aware that my consciousness was settling back in my body again. But slowly, like a dust motes descending through the evening air down to where my body sat upright at the table, head bent, fingers furiously scribbling notes about what was happening as if they had a mind of their own. But then, as I returned, the intensity of the experience began to fade. The miracle began to withdraw. 3 hours in all had passed. I was left with a pile of scribbled notes, written and titled automatically, "The Physical Universe as Idea Construction." All that was physically salvaged from the remarkable experience, and I knew beyond all doubt that those ideas had been given to me initially in the forgotten dream of the night before. Since those notes were born so directly from that event, and since they represented the first strong intrusions from the interior universe into my own life, I still find them intriguing. I'm looking at them now, as I work on this computer some 5 years later. As I work on this chapter some 5 years later. They seemed charged with a fierce vitality that leads me to consider the ambiguous nature of creativity. For if those ideas and the experience itself initiated a new kind of consciousness in me, they also possessed an explosive force powerful enough to considerably dismantle the previous frameworks of my thoughts and ideas. The ordinary surface of my world literally quaked open, and I had no conception then of what was still to emerge. In the Seth material, the book, I included only a few brief quotes from The Physical Universe as Idea Construction. But here I will go into that manuscript somewhat more thoroughly, since it is so close to the raw form that erupted from the experience and represents, in embryo, I believe, the material that Seth would later be giving us, The manuscript itself consisted of approximately 40 pages of scribbled notes written during the height of the experience. Later I wrote 50 more pages as I tried to recapture the feelings and insights I'd had at the time. I'm including here only some of the passages that were written by my fingers without my knowledge while I was out of my body. To some of my readers, these ideas will be far from original. I discovered later that many of them have appeared in esoteric manuscripts throughout the centuries, though to me they were not only completely new, but also were accompanied by such intense certainty that I would never be able to doubt their validity. Following are excerpts from The Physical Universe as Idea Construction. In the original manuscript, this entire portion came to me as definitions. In bold, energy is the basis of the universe. Ideas are mental transformations of energy by an entity into physical reality. Idea constructions are transformations of ideas into physical reality. Space is where our own idea constructions do not exist in the physical universe. The physical body is the material construction of the entity's idea of itself under the properties of matter. The individual is the part of the entity or whole self of which we are conscious in daily life. It is that part of the whole self which we are able to express or make real through our own idea constructions on a physical level. The subconscious is the threshold of an idea's emergence into the individual conscious mind. It connects the entity and the individual. Personality is the individual's overall responses to ideas received and constructed. It represents the emotional coloration of the individual's ideas and constructions at any given time. Emotions are the driving force that propel ideas into constructions. Instinct is the minimum ability for the idea constructions necessary for physical survival. Learning is the potential for constructing new idea complexes from existing ideas. Idea complexes are groups of ideas formed together like building blocks to form more complicated constructions in physical reality. Communication is the interchange of ideas by entities on the energy non-physical level. Action is the idea in motion. The senses are channels of projection by which ideas are projected outward to create the world of appearances. Environment is the overall idea constructions with which an individual surrounds himself. Physical time is the apparent lapse between the emergence of an idea in the physical universe as a construction and its replacement by another. The past is the memory of ideas that were but are no longer physical constructions. The present is the apparent point of any idea's emergence into physical reality. The future is the apparent lapse between the disappearance of the one idea construction and its replacement by another in physical reality. Psychological time is the apparent lapse between the conception of ideas. Aging is the effect upon an idea construction of the properties of matter of which the construction is composed. Growth is the formation of an idea construction toward its fullest possible materialization following the properties of matter. Sleep is the entity's relative rest from idea construction except the minimum necessary for physical survival. The physical universe is the sum of individual idea constructions. Memory is the ghost image of past idea constructions. Each evolutionary change is propelled and caused by a new idea. As the idea is in the process of being constructed onto the physical plane, it prepares the material world for its own actuality and creates the prerequisite conditions. Evolution is energy's movement toward conscious expression in the physical universe, but it is basically non-physical. A species at any given time is the materialization of the inner images or ideas of its individual members, each of whom forms his own idea constructions. At no point can we actually say that one construction vanishes and another takes its place, but artificially we adopt certain points as past, present, and future for convenience. At some point, we agree that the physical construction ceases to be one thing and becomes another, but actually it still contains elements of the past construction and is already becoming the next one. Though the construction of an idea seems to disappear physically, the idea which it represents still exists. Sleep is the entity's rest from physical idea construction. Only enough energy is used to keep the personal image construction in existence. The entity withdraws into basic energy realms and is comparatively free from time since idea construction is at a minimum level. The entity is in contact with other entities at a subconscious area. After death, the entity will have its ghost images, memories, at its command, though their apparent sequence will no longer apply. Memories are properties of the subconscious energy entity and, as such, are indestructible, though they may be unavailable to the individual under various circumstances. The next plane of existence will involve further training in energy and use and manipulation. Since the energy of which the entity is composed is self-generating and always seeking more complicated form and awareness, each material particle is an idea construction formed by the individual bits of energy that compose it. Each entity perceives only his own constructions on a physical level. Because all constructions are more or less faithful reproductions in matter of the same basic ideas, since all individuals are, generally speaking, on the same level in this plane, then they agree sufficiently in space, time, and degrees so that the world of appearances has coherence and relative predictability. Center of the page, bold, the fabric of physical matter. All physical matter is idea construction. We only see our own constructions. So-called empty space is full of constructions not our own that we cannot perceive. Our skin connects us to other physical constructions, and through it we are involved in the complicated fabric of conscious matter. The action of each one of the most minute of these particles affects each other one. The slight motion of one grain of sand causes a corresponding alteration in the distribution of the stars and in all matter's fabric, from an atom in a man's skull down to the slightest variation in a microbe's action. All matter is idea construction woven together. Each construction is individual and yet cohesive to the whole. The smallest particle is necessary to the whole, forming part of the matter's design. In the center bold, the universe as a physical body, see diagram. The matter of the universe can be conceived as a physical body, an organism of individual cells, objects, held together by connective tissue, the chemicals and elements of air. This connective tissue is also alive and carries electrical impulses. Within it, as within the connective tissues of the human body, there is a certain elasticity, a certain amount of regeneration, and a constant replacement of the atoms and molecules that compose it. While the whole retains its shape, the material itself is being constantly born and replaced. This rough diagram came with the above material. It was supposed to represent the energy of the entity as it flowed outward through the subconscious to the conscious, in order to construct the physical image and environment in response to the self's idea of what it was. I was involved with the peer experience behind the diagram and words with which I was left. The revelation was that there were no real boundaries to the self. Skin did not separate us from others, but connected us in a webwork of energy. What we thought of as self and not self were interrelated, and that, in this life at least, ideas were constantly being transformed into matter. Here are some further excerpts from Idea Construction. The ability of the entity to transform energy into an idea and then to construct it physically determines the entity's place on the physical evolutionary plane. Simple organisms are capable of picking up fewer communications. Their range is less, but the vitality and validity of their constructions is excellent. In simple organisms such as the paramecium and amoeba, the few sharp ideas received are constructed almost simultaneously, without reflection. The organism needs no other mechanism to translate ideas. What it has is sufficient. More complicated organisms, mammals for example, have need of further mechanisms to construct ideas because they are able to perceive more of them. Here memory is an element. Now the organism has a built-in ghost image of past constructions by which to perfect and test new ones. Reflection of some sort enters into the picture, and with it the organism is given more to do. Slowly, within its range of receptivity, it is given some choice in the actual construction of ideas into physical reality. The reflection is brief, but for a moment the animal partakes of a new dimension. The shadow of time glimmers in his eyes as the still imperfected memory of past constructions linger in his consciousness. As yet, memory storage is small, but now the instantaneous construction is no longer instantaneous in our terms. There is a pause. The organism, dog or tiger, can choose to attack or not to attack. The amoeba must construct its small world without reflection and without time as we know it. Entities with still broader range need more complicated structure. The scope of their receptivity is so large that the simple automatic nervous system is not enough. The amoeba constructs each idea it receives, because it is able to receive so few. All must be constructed to ensure survival. With man, the opposite becomes true. He has such a range of receptivity that it is impossible for him to construct all of his ideas physically. As his scope widened, a mechanism was necessary that would allow him to choose. Self-consciousness and reason were the answers. Suddenly, time blossomed like a strange flower in his skull. Before this, he was transfixed in the present. But memory produced another dimension in the animal, and man carried it further. No longer did memory flicker briefly and disappear, enclosing him in darkness again. Now it stretched brightly behind him and also stretched out ahead, a road on which he always saw his own changing image. He learned continuity, and with his focused memory at his command, man's ego was born, which could follow its own identity through the maze of blazing impulses that beset him, could recognize itself through the pattern of continuing constructions, and could separate itself from its action in the physical world. Here you have the birth of subject and object, the I am, who is the doer or constructor, and the construction itself. This new dimension enabled the species to manipulate and recognize its own constructions, and freed it to focus greater energy in projecting some ideas over others. In other words, conscious purpose became possible physically. Somewhere along the line, however, man began to divorce himself almost completely and artificially from his own constructions. Hence his groping, his sense of alienation from nature, his search for a cause or creator of a creation he no longer recognized as his own. End. It's impossible to describe the impression that this manuscript made on me, much less to verbalize the experience that accompanied it. All of these ideas were completely new to me and quite contrary to my own beliefs. I'd never written anything like this before. Rob was painting in his studio at the time. When he came out, I was so excited and amazed that I could hardly speak. We stayed up late that night, talking, tried to explain what had happened, realizing for the first time the vast gulf between words and subjective feelings. So I showed Rob the manuscript. Without it, incidentally, I would have been left without any tangible evidence at all. Yet when it was all over, my intellect was on its own again. What did the whole thing mean? I knew beyond doubt that the ideas I'd received were true, yet, intellectually, they shocked me completely. Now, 7 years later, I realized that this was an excellent example of the ways in which the inner self can suddenly regenerate and revitalize the personality, open up new methods of perception, shatter barriers, and flood the personality with energy that sets it right, reorganizing it in more meaningful directions. It is a second birth. Such events are like geysers that erupt suddenly bringing us closer to the center of our being. They come from subjective matter rather than objective reality, and, in my case at least, they become objectified, their force propelling them into physical actualization. End part 1. Peace, light, and love. Aloha. Thank you, Jane.